Yeah, please. Thank you very much. All right, thank you very much. Really delighted to see y'all. We had a very wonderful symposium here, and the symposium was quite exciting. We had many, many people, and unfortunately, today we're a little delayed. We were just having some technical issues, but we're very happy to see you. And I just wanted to talk today about a very important issue, and that's the continental African state, challenges and necessities. And even though we are not able to, you're not able to see, can you hear me? Oh, the microphone is not on. Okay. Okay, then I think we need to, it's probably down there in the box. Sorry, in the back. You see the button there? All right, one, two, one. Hello? Hello? Hello, one, two, three. There it is. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. Thank you, Dr. Jabali. All right, so we would just talk a little bit today about some challenges to the continental African state. This has been a subject that has been dear to my heart for the last 25 years. In fact, I have been engaged in many conferences and congresses discussing this whole issue of the continental African state. But before I start my lecture, I want to first of all welcome all of you who are on YouTube. And I want to also remind you that our next event will be on September the 17th, when Dr. Lateef Davis will be talking about gun violence in urban America. That's on the September the 17th, gun violence in urban America, Dr. Lateef Davis. And we're looking forward to seeing you at that time. And then we will give you, after that, we will give you the schedule for those of you who come physically to 5535 Germantown Avenue, as well as those who are on YouTube. But today, I was urgently interested in having a conversation with you about the continental state of Africa and Pan-Africanism. And I wanted to have this conversation with you, and unfortunately, I'm not able to show you the few slides I have, but I can give you a picture. You have in your mind an understanding of the whole continent of Africa. And, you know, you can think about it from Morocco all the way to South Africa. You can think about it from Somalia all the way to Senegal. And you can think about the fact that there are 54 nations in Africa. It's a huge continent with those 54 nations. That's like, in the U.S., there are 50 states in the U.S. And those 50 states, over the years, through various political orientations, have come together to form what they call the United States. In other words, the states have become united. They're different, though. Maine is certainly different from Idaho. And you can guess that Texas is different from New York State. These are different states. And in fact, even the populations of these states are different. In Texas, if you go south of San Antonio, you're in basically a Mexican territory. I mean, most of the people there are Mexican, and in some places they use the Mexican pesos for money in Texas, in the United States of America. And if you go to certain areas of Maine, there are people who are more identified with the people in Canada than they are to the people who live in Colorado. So that's just the nature of, when you have a continental state. And the United States is such a continental state. In Africa, we don't have a continental state. In Africa, we have a dream of a continental state. And we've been looking for this dream for a long time, since the time of Kwame Nkrumah, when he argued that it was necessary for Ghana not to have its independence alone, but its independence is nothing, he said, if we don't connect to all the other countries on the continent of Africa. So this dream of a continental state in Africa is very much at the heart of Pan-Africanism in the interpretation of the 20th century and in the 21st century. But I know and you know that there are enormous challenges in Africa to this, and I will discuss some of them, and I will also try and give you some idea of what it is that we face and what we probably can do. And I do this by saying that the possibilities are these, and I'm being real frank with you. Africa needs to reduce bilateral agreements with colonizing nations. Now, what I mean by these bilateral agreements with colonizing nations, that means that a colonizing nation like France would go to Cameroon and say, I want to make a deal with you, just between me and you, France and Cameroon. And that deal that they make is a deal that's contractual. And it's a legal international deal that they have made, which may very well prevent Cameroon from making a deal with Gabon or making a deal with Nigeria, you see? So that what has happened is there's been a proliferation in Africa of these bilateral agreements with colonizing nations. And then I think that the possibility is that when we get rid of making all these bilateral agreements, if we can, then it will also help us avoid ethnic violence that's based on colonial histories. Because in the continent, we do have, from time to time, ethnic violence that's based on people saying, this is my territory, this is who I am, and so on. And all these territories in Africa have been defined by the colonial administrators. It is not, Nigeria did not exist as Nigeria 300 years ago. You see what I mean? So basically, this is a colonial creation. All these countries, for the most part, are colonial creations, with the exception, perhaps, of Ethiopia. And Ethiopia itself has changed its nature and its boundaries. So that's one, avoiding ethnic violence. The other one is we need to reduce all transit and cross-border prohibitions. There's no reason, for example, why coming from the United States of America, I can fly into Ethiopia and not have any problems. But my sister, who is flying with me from Senegal, goes to Ethiopia and she has a problem. Your visa doesn't work. You have this. Why should that be? What is the reason that Africa has created all of these boundaries and borders to prevent people from moving from one country to the next? That's a problem. The other one is I think we need to encourage economic interaction among communities. If you do not know what the people of Rwanda are doing and what they are producing, then it's likely that because you don't know, you assume that it's only in Europe that you can get certain products. And you go to Europe rather than coming to African country, which may be only 2 countries away from you. So we need to encourage economic interaction. This means you got to develop highways that are all over the continent, that don't just go within your country, but that they really go all over. They're global. Rather, they're continental highways in Africa. And my dream has always been, since the time I was 22, was to be able to get in a car in Cape Town and drive all the way to Khartoum. That's my dream. I want to see all the people. I want to meet all the people. I want to understand their cultures. That's my dream, you know? Somebody said, well, you could walk. Well, you could. Some people do. But but in the days, that's what I was thinking. That's how I would like to do it, you see? But then we have to also understand that we can introduce innovations from one region to the next. I have been amazed when you read, and even in social media, you see things that are almost unbelievable. There are young inventors throughout the African continent are doing incredible things. They're inventing automobiles, they're inventing airplanes, they're doing all kinds of stuff. And you see all that. And you say, well, wait a minute. Why aren't we encouraging that? And why aren't there collectives that are working, condominiums that are working economically to help advance those people who are entrepreneurs in this regard? And then I think that the other possibility is that we could solidify the heritages of people with no regard to colonial borders. I mean, there's no reason, for example, for there to be wars and battles between people because they were separated by colonial powers. I mean, you just take, you take Ghana, for example. There are people in Ghana who are Ewe people. And these Ewe people are separated by a border that keeps them from Togo. And then there are people in other places like Nigeria and Benin that are separated by a border. They're Yoruba people on both sides of the border. Yoruba people in Benin, Yoruba people in Nigeria, but they can't cross borders. They can't interact unless they go through a lot of complications and a lot of problems. This, to me, is a big fundamental problem with what we have to do. So now here's my crucial concerns, and I told you I won't be long. There are inevitable conflicts, and I want to talk about them in a minute. And then there are now the appearance of new leaders in West Africa, particularly. And then there's something that's happening in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger that we ought to be aware of. And then there are the realities of the Russia-Ukraine war and their implications for Africa, deep implications. And then there's going to be a coming struggle over precious minerals, particularly uranium and titanium on the continent of Africa. I mean, we already have had this struggle for gold. You heard of the Wagner Group being taken over the government of Central African Republic. So there are things that are happening that are only happening because there is no continental state of Africa. If there were a United States of Africa, these things would not be happening. Now, let me just tell you about ECOWAS. ECOWAS, of course, is the economic organization for West African states. And that's a very powerful organization. It's been powerful for a while. And ECOWAS, of course, is one of just several of these organizations on the African continent that really tries to hold economics together in a region. And ECOWAS has tried to do this. In Southern Africa, they have what they call SADC. It's the same sort of idea, where you have a group of African states in the southern part of Africa that come together that says, look, we're going to come together as a regional organization. Well, ECOWAS is also like that in West Africa. ECOWAS is a very important organization, economic organization in West Africa. But there are inevitable conflicts. And we're beginning to see these inevitable conflicts in ECOWAS right now. In fact, here's what I want to tell you. The appearance of new leaders in West Africa, and the youngest new leader, Ibrahim Traore, is only 34 years old. He's the youngest leader of a nation in the world. 34 years old, Ibrahim Traore. And not only is he the youngest, but he has inherited the character, the confidence, the courage, and the intellect, and the political astuteness of Thomas Sankara. He is the leader of Burkina Faso. And this young man, if you go to social media, and listen to him, he's talking like the old heads used to talk 30 and 40 years ago. He's giving people the same instruction. And he's saying some very important things that are necessary to be said. Let me just tell you this, and you know this already, that the French government basically has a stranglehold on most of the French-speaking countries in Africa. It's an economic stranglehold. You got to use the francs that they give you. They control your money. All those countries, we have a sister from Cameroon. I don't want to talk much about it, but I just want to say, you use the franc. That's what you use. And in fact, the French are so clever. There are only certain kinds of francs that you can use. You can't use the francs that you use in France, but you still use their francs, you see? So the money is not the same. But all of these countries that were colonies of France, they're in a situation where France has said to them that we will hold your money. And France holds their money, basically. How much money do you need? Well, let me look and see, do you have enough in your account? And then you give you a certain amount of money, you see? So now what has happened is that there are several countries that are finally, because of new young leaders, have said, wait a minute, we're breaking out of this. We don't need to do this. And first it was Mali. The country of Mali, historic Mali, which is based on the pattern of the old empire of Mali. The Mali leader said, wait a minute, French, you need to go and your money needs to go. Get out. We don't need you. Just get out of Mali. That's what, that's what I call the Chinese break. When the Chinese, when Mao was the leader of China, they just simply said, you know what? We close the doors. We don't want nothing to do with anybody in the world. We're going to straighten our act together in China, and then we will reappear. So that's what Mali is basically saying. It's saying, okay, so there are all these countries that are using the franc and are using French military and so on, and they're beholden to the French. We say, France, get out. And that's what they are doing, you see. And the situation, of course, in Burkina Faso was similar. And now there's a situation in Niger. It's very complicated in Niger because in Niger, the military took over in a coup d'etat. And one of the things that they did, and this is a very, it's a nuance that I'm not quite expert on yet. I'm still studying it. But the leader who was elected democratically in Niger, which is the fastest growing nation on the earth in terms of population. Niger is just right north of Nigeria. The average age of the people in Niger is like 18 years of age. That's the average age. That's compared to 49 in France. You know, the average age of the French is 49. Average age of the Nigerian is 18. And the average family has like 8 children. It's the fastest growing nation in the world. Look it up. This is Niger. So they took over the government, and they took over the government from a man named Bassoum. Now, it's interesting to me, and I'm going to get some more information on it, but I think you should be aware of what's happening. Bassoum was elected, and that's what I'm going to tell you. He was elected democratically. But sometimes you can be elected democratically, and people just don't know. And in this case with Bassoum, he was elected democratically, and then all of a sudden people say, wait a minute, this guy is not, he's not from here. This is an Arab guy come down here and make himself leader of the country. But the people said, wait a minute, but he's elected. So now it has set up a very interesting situation in the African continent. If we're talking about continental Africa, United States of Africa. In ECOWAS, Bassoum who seemed, from all my estimation, to be a pretty decent man, from what I understand, was accepted by ECOWAS, the economic organization for West Africa, as a leader and as the legitimate leader, democratically elected leader of Niger. But the people revolted against him, and the military put him out of office, okay? So now what happens? Nigeria, which is the biggest country in Africa in population of nearly 250 million Nigerians. Nigeria is the leader of ECOWAS. ECOWAS, remember, West African nations. And Nigeria is the most dominant force in West Africa. And Nigeria, as a leader of ECOWAS, is saying, we want Bazoum to be reinstated. We want the coup people to be put in jail and Bazoum to be reinstated. This has set up a big problem because the African Union, which is the overall organization of African heads of state, that organization, the African Union, has decided in a way different from ECOWAS. And the African Union is basically under the direction of South Africa. So now you got South Africa and Nigeria at loggerheads. ECOWAS, the Organization of West African States, where Nigeria is the heavyweight, has said they are giving the coup plotters in Niger 7 days to bring Bazoum back to power. The African Union said, we're going to give them 15 days to see what they're going to do. We're not going to act right now. We're going to give them 15 days. So now you have Ramaphosa from South Africa and Tinubu, who is a recently elected president of Nigeria, at loggerheads. What do we do with Niger? There is increasing support in Nigeria for an invasion of Niger by the Nigerian army to bring Niger back into the democratic fold and, of course, to put Bazoum back in leadership. We don't know how that's going to turn out. I guess in about 4 or 5 days, we'll know. Because the military of ECOWAS has already said they're preparing their way to go into Niger. Now, Niger is very important. That's why everybody wants to be there. You remember a few years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, there were American soldiers that were killed in Niger. You may not remember that incident, but I remember that incident. In fact, one of them was an African American. And the congresswoman from Florida was very, very upset that they had left his body in Niger. You may not know that story, but there was a story. And the reason why this is important is because the United States has a military base in Niger. It has a military base in Niger, West Africa. But of course, the United States has military bases everywhere, right? But not only the United States, but France has a military base, an Air Force base in Niger. This is another issue. So now you got France, the United States, at least those two powers, and on the borders of Niger, waiting to go in, are the Russians from the Wagner Group. The Wagner Group, that's a group that controls Central African Republic. They control all the mines, all the gold mines controlled by the Russians. So now they're waiting. Why is this? Titanium, uranium. Niger is one of the richest countries in the world by minerals. And in fact, it is also one of the poorest countries in the world. That's crazy. It's like, wait a minute, this is a paradox. This is the richest country in the world in terms of minerals, and yet it's the poorest people. There's a problem here. And part of the problem is that we can't get to the continental state of Africa because of many other players in this situation. That's why the realities of the Russian-Ukraine war must be looked at and understood. Many of the nations of Africa are on the side of the Russians. They're not on the side of Ukraine. I mean, the Americans say, well, why are they not waiting for the Ukrainians to do this and to do that and do that? But the African people and leaders, many of them have bought the idea that Russia was actually trying to get rid of Nazi sentiment in Ukraine. Now, y'all may not believe it, you listening to different news and so on, but I'm just telling you what the issues are. So you remember when Putin was going to go to South Africa and the international court said, well, you got to arrest him. And Ramaphosa said, we're not going to arrest Putin. And you know what Putin did? Putin called a meeting of the African leaders to come to Moscow, and they all went and sat down and talked to Putin. And they said, well, we're on the side of Russia, but we're going to work with Ukraine to bring about peace. And part of this issue is historical. Russia supported the liberation movement of most African nations against the colonial powers of Britain, France, Portugal, and Spain. So people have an allegiance based on history and on the fact that in Russia, and I mean, you do have a very strong relationship to African countries. I mean, when I was visiting Russia, the Russians made an announcement that they would like to have 25 to 50,000 Nigerians a year come to Russia and help settle Russia. And the reason for that is because their population of 120 million in Russia is very small for a country that is so vast. They need people. They need workers. They need people to get engaged in Russia. So these are the problems I'm telling you that I see. And let me just tell you that the way that we can try to get around some of this, and I'm going to come back to some of this in a minute, we need to use a digital platform to minimize religious zeal. Digital platform to minimize religious zeal. One of the things I've noticed, and I've noticed this from the time I went to Zimbabwe, believing that socialism was the way of the future, and living in Zimbabwe and going back to Zimbabwe several times after that, and seeing the incredible amount of evangelical religious zeal. I couldn't even believe it. I'm on a bus. I'm on a public bus from Bulawayo. I'm in Bulawayo. I'm on this bus in Bulawayo, and then I am riding to Harare on this bus. And the bus driver decides to put on an evangelical preacher from Louisiana, white evangelical preacher from Louisiana on the bus. And there we all, we couldn't do anything. 40, 50 people on the bus going for 3 hours or 4 hours or so, riding from Bulawayo, hearing this evangelical preacher. It was unreal. It was just surreal. I'm asking myself, what is this? And why is it that Africans, of all people, we are the ones who are most zealous about other people's religion, whether it's Christianity or Islam or even Buddhism or Hinduism? We become the most fanatical about it. We just said, we gotta do this. Wait a minute. Look at your own traditions. Interrogate your own history. Ask yourself, what do the elders and their elders And their elder, what did they think about the world? They are the ones who came up with civilization. Africa created the first civilizations in the world. Why are you waiting to come into this Johnny come late thing and just do it? We can't do that. Minimize religious zeal. That's important. Your religion should be your private thing. Don't come to me with your religion. I'm not interested in that. I'm only interested in action. And I'm interested in action on behalf of humanity. Then you got to create collective orientations to solve problems. That was fundamental to Africa, that you had to have collectivity, communalism. We said that. And you have to find the best models for that. Whether you go back in history and look at the great queens, Amontillans, Molefi Kete, people who organized. I mean, even go back to the classical civilizations of Menes. Menes united 42 different ethnic groups and made one nation. That's why Egypt was the first nation in the world, because this man, he brought these people together. How did he bring them together? He didn't bring, one thing he didn't do was he didn't get rid of their religions. He didn't get rid of their religion. He said, okay, you want your God? You want your God? You want your deity to be here and to be a part of this? We'll take him. You want your goddess to be a part of it? Oh, we'll take her. And so what Menes did took everybody. And then the state religion or tradition was based on the kingship, you see. But as far as all the other people, they said, this is why you have, when you go to the, people talk about the Book of the Dead, right? The book of the going forth by day and coming forth by night, that book, the Book of the Dead, in there are talking about the 42 different ethnic groups and what each one did. If you read, that's what it's about. Is each one, it tell you if you go this one, all these people had traditions and they respected these traditions, and yet they made one government. And we can go into that. One day I'll give a lecture on that. But we have models. We have even political models, Sankara, Samora Machel, even to a certain degree Mbeki, Ruto, the new guy in Kenya. I'll talk about him in a minute, Mugabe. All these people were Pan-Africanists, you see. Now, there's a case that I've written about, and I'm happy to report that there's been some progress. It's the case of Senegal. And I wrote a letter, an open letter to the president, Macky Sall, whom I know. And this is the situation where a young brother named Ousmane Sonko rose up and became a political leader because he was popular with the masses. They loved him. And he was in jail. They put him in jail. And part of this was because Macky Sall had wanted to run for the third time as president, and that was against the Constitution of Senegal. And so Sonko raised a big fuss. He created a lot of action, and he created with his political party, and he was put in jail. Now, subsequently, Macky Sall backed away from this third term and said, I'm not going to run for the third term. But I'm still concerned, and I'm saying this to my friend Macky Sall right now, publicly. I'm still concerned that Sonko is in jail. There's no reason legitimately for Sonko to be in jail. And I would love to see those people who were arrested for political reasons in Senegal released. That's what I would love to see, because that to me would show the kind of values and character that we always say represents Africa. If we say Ma'at represents Africa, then do Ma'at. That's what I think. Now, I think we got to do a couple of other things. We need to protect Africa's security from outside influences, particularly military influences. That means you have to work very hard to educate and bring to consciousness the young people. Because what is happening in Africa is that we're going to eventually have a youth bomb. It's a youth bomb. I told you how young the population is. I'm telling you, there are going to be, in all these nations, young people are going to rise up and to demand new government that would be responsive to a continental Africa and to Pan-Africanism and to equality and to democracy and freedom. One of the things Ibrahim Traore said, which is so wise for a young man, he says a slave must assume his own revolt. And if he cannot assume the responsibilities for his own revolt, he can never be pitied. Don't pity somebody who won't stand up for their own revolt. Now, the problem with the continent in terms of world powers, I talked about regional powers. I'll talk about them a little bit more, but it's the USA, China, Russia, and France. And I haven't said much about China, but I guarantee you China is in the mix. And China is in the mix because there are thousands. In fact, some people say there are maybe over 100,000 Chinese throughout Africa, and they're everywhere. When you get on a plane anywhere in a big city like in Africa, you see Chinese. And if you're in Douala, Cameroon, there's a Chinatown. There are 4 or 5 blocks of Chinese shops, Chinatown in Africa. First one I'd ever seen. I said, oh, this is amazing. There's Zambia the same way. And it's a growing phenomenon. In Ethiopia, it's the same way. So what I'm saying to you is that for these young leaders of Africa, they are asking for African elders not to be beggars anymore, but for them to realize the wealth that is within Africa itself in terms of physical wealth, the people, and in terms of material wealth, so that we can be able to deal with USA, China, Russia, and France. And that's when we talk about maximizing African values like ma'at, harmony, and balance, and order, and so forth, communalism, the collective orientation. People walk around with shirts saying Ubuntu, Umuntu, Ingumuntu, Ingabantu. We say that. But do we believe it? You know what I'm saying? That whole concept that I am because we are. I mean, that's a fundamental thing. So the crisis of ECOWAS over the Niger issue is one that I think we need to watch because of the emergent regional powers. And I'll say this and I'll be finished. This is what I think. I think Nigeria wants to express itself. And I think it probably should express itself by now. Only problem is that the instability of Nigeria itself. The factionalism within the country itself is problematic, and I've seen that. Been in Nigeria 14 or 15 times. It's a shaky foundation, but it's a big country. It's a very powerful country militarily in West Africa. It dominates West Africa. So it's an emergent regional power. It is conceivable that Nigeria could take over Niger. It is conceivable it could take over Burkina Faso, and it could take over Mali. It is conceivable. But we don't think they will do that. We hope they won't do that. But that's conceivable to consolidate a sense of African expansion. Nigeria, it seems to me that there are leaders in Nigeria who are interested in that. They're looking at the situation now and saying, is this possible? And there has never been in that part of Africa the same desire that we saw in East Africa or that we see in far West Africa, like the relationship between Guinea and Mali, which was always a relationship where they thought they could be together, you see. So Nigeria is something is a country we need to watch, and particularly with Tinubu just being elected, and elected in an interesting situation, it would be very important for us to watch. We need to watch Kenya. Kenya is also a regional power. Now, what has Kenya done? Kenya has just decided to send 1,000 troops to Haiti. Haiti is not in Africa. It is a black country, but it's not in Africa. Kenya is on the Indian Ocean side of Africa. It is sending 1,000 troops from Kenya to Haiti, Dr. Amanor's country. Dr. Amanor is shaking his head. He's sending 1,000 troops to Haiti on behalf of the United Nations. The last time the United Nations was in Haiti, they brought cholera. We don't know what they're going to do now. And now they can accuse the Africans of bringing. This is not a good thing, but it is Kenya expressing its power, you see. They've also, as you know, sent a lot of troops to Congo from Kenya to keep the peace in Congo. So they're expressing that their military expertise, you see. So South Africa, of course, is watching. And it's not going to be quiet. Ramaphosa has dreams of a South African regional power that would eventually include Zimbabwe, you see, maybe Mozambique, maybe Namibia, you see, and Botswana. This is all these things are emerging. You're seeing it. But you have to also give an account to Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the second largest nation in Africa in terms of population. It has over 140 million people, probably. So Ethiopia is right there. There's Nigeria with 100 million more, and then there's Ethiopia. And what is Ethiopia doing? Ethiopia is saying we are building the Renaissance Dam, regardless of what the Egyptians and the Sudanese say. We're going to build a dam on the Abai River, the Blue Nile, because our farmers need it. And so then there's, of course, a big debate. Shall we attack Ethiopia? Egyptians are talking about that. Now, Egypt is a part of Africa, but some of them don't believe it. They don't act like they're Africans. You see what I mean? They don't have a sense of the solidarity with the rest of Africa. So there's a problem because the whole issue of the flow of the Nile is extremely significant here. So those are the main points. And I want to just tell you finally that we need a democratic Sudan. I believe that Sudan has great potential, but we need an Afrocentric Sudan. We need a Sudan that's democratic, based on the majority of the people, and based on the idea that African agency is more important than any other agency for African people. And then we have a re-emergent Kush nation of Sudan with an attitude that it can become what it was in the past. My brothers and sisters and friends, I thank you for this time. Thank you very much. We have a few questions, and if there are questions in the audience, we can take a couple. Okay. Is the mic on? Troy, can you see any questions? Okay. Is it the same button? I think that's it. I think that's your button. Is it? It's not. It's not your mic button. That was yours. So yeah, just 1 minute. But if anybody in the audience with a question, you can ask.
AmeriCorps is a big problem. Think like this. AmeriCorps, Obama took into Kenya, AmeriCorps, all the drones
Yeah.
they
Yes.
have over there.
Yes. All right, there is Brother Mangaliso.
AmeriCorps, Dr. Asante,
Americo.
they wanted aid from Obama, and Obama said you had to take AmeriCorps, and I think they got around several hundred, if not
Yeah.
less, of those drones in various different states, and that's a big problem that
Yeah.
they wanted to take.
It's a good comment. There's truly throughout the African continent, we have seen the American government quite active in many ways, and one of the ways that the government has been active is to supply people with weapons and to supply them with resources, but to demand certain kinds of loyalties. This is the thing, and this is why it is true, as Ibrahim Traore says, we have to speak for ourselves, and we have to be for ourselves. I mean, Africans can make drones. They have made everything else, and certainly the economies of South Africa and Nigeria and Ethiopia and Kenya are capable of doing it. They have incredible factories and entrepreneurs and people who can do this. So it's not that you have to buy these things from somebody else or get them from somebody else as gifts, you see. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Asante, for this very informative lecture. And welcome back from Brazil.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So mine is more like comment, and it was
Yes.
regard to Nigeria. I'm connecting it with Sudan.
Yes.
And the point that you said, the Mohammed Bazoum was
Yeah.
democratically elected,
Yes.
but it happened that now people found out that he's an Arab and he's carrying
Yes.
an Arab ideology, and that's
Yes.
true.
Yes.
So there is a report that says Mohammed Bazoum supported Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, the one in Khartoum, with 6,000 soldiers, best of his soldiers, who are fighting in Khartoum today.
Wow.
And Mohammed Dagalo and the Mohammed Bazoum
Right.
socially are connected. So the same community,
Same community.
that
Same.
in Sudan and fighting Khartoum today, they are in Nigeria.
Yeah.
And that's why the point was saying that he was, the military did the coup because he sent his best soldiers to Khartoum
to fight
against
the
the
people.
Sudanese people.
Wow.
And now he left behind without having troops out to protect him. Then this indicate that he is he has a different, I mean, not Afrocentric
Right.
orientation.
Right,
He has
right.
an Arab orientation.
Yes,
Although
yes.
he's democratically elected,
Yes.
but African found out that he is not for us.
That's right.
He's
Okay.
carrying Arab agenda, and
Right.
I want to connect
I
to
appreciate
make that
I
point
appreciate
very
that
clear. Thank
I
you.
appreciate that comment because it was very strange to me to hear it, and yet in one way I understood that the African Union, which South Africa maybe even chairing this year, is taking a position in support of Bazoum under President Ramaphosa. The idea is that South Africa has this idea, has some sort of dreamy idea, I call it, some sort of dreamy idea that doesn't allow them to often understand Arab racism. They understand European racism, but they don't understand Arab racism. And that's a big issue because I've had this conversation. I had this conversation once at the home of Thabo Mbeki. And the whole idea about Sudan for them was that it was a class issue. And this is, again, coming out of the fundamentalist socialist ideology. But it was not, my argument is not just class. There are people who hate Africans and who basically want to do damage to people because of their African heritage. And that's not good. That's bad. And if Bazoum is in that tradition, then I could see that some of the younger people in Niger have learned about this and they are, of course, wanting to express themselves. The other question is this. I mean, now that you raise this, in Niger, you have the French and you have the Americans. In Mali, you had the French government in there, but yet the jihadists, the Islamic jihadists, kept creating so much havoc in Mali. And you got the French government right there, the French military. They were not doing anything, it seemed. And this is true, of course, in Cameroon, too. You got the jihadists in the northern part of Cameroon doing the same thing, creating all kinds of havoc. And the question is that if the French are supposed to be your friends and they are allowing this chaos, then you need to kick them out. And you need to bring people in who are from the area who want to work and keep them in check. So I think that's, okay. Yes, please.
I have a couple of questions. The first
Sure.
one is from Jan Rosine.
Yes.
Yes, and she wants to know what do you think about Christianism in Africa? So if you don't think that the multiplication of the church is justified by the oppression and injustice of the post-colonial states, that's her question.
Mm-hmm. Well, the evidence of Christianity in Africa is demonstrates that it's not just post-colonial; it is colonial. In fact, it came with the colonists. It came with the Portuguese and the Spaniards and the French and the British. They brought Christianity to us. We didn't have that. Why would we need it? We created the oldest religions in the world. Why would we need them? And the only reason we needed them, as they saw it in the colonial sense, was it was a way to control black people. The same way in the United States. Why do you think black people are Christians? You got a lot of black people who are Christians in this country, and it's basically control of the black mind. That's basically what it is. And you got a lot of black people who become Muslims in this country. What is that? Control of the black mind. You can't think for yourself. You never had any history. You never had any ideology. You never thought of what is good and what is truth and what is right and what is harmony. You never thought anything. The only thing you thought was what the Arab or the white man gave you. So no, I'm against all that.
Yeah, well, now the question that I have is because I'm trying to understand your position about this, how can I say that, the Continental?
African state.
Yes, African state. Yes, it's similar to what happened in Latin America, because even though in Latin America, and also people here in the States call themselves Americans when American is a continent, not just a country.
Yes.
Yeah, and we have a lot of frontiers or barriers between our countries in Latin America with North America, or even in our countries with the native people, I mean,
Yes.
the indigenous people,
Yes.
black people, and racism have created a lot of barriers even in our same country. So I mean, it's like what I want to understand if it's the same situation in Latin America or in America that Africa, or it's completely different.
I think Africa is a little different, but it's not much different. But I tell you what happened in South America. In South America, particularly in the 19th century, you had the Bolivarian Revolution. And the Bolivarian Revolution in South America, where Simón Bolivar was fighting against the Spaniards, they defeated the Spanish, but in doing so, they created separate states in South America. So you have Venezuela and Colombia. They were at one time in the same region. You see what I mean? So there never has been in South America yet a dream of a continental state. I don't think. I don't know that. ideology. I know Brazil is major. It is, of course, as big as the United States, the 48 states. So it's a massive country, but it doesn't. At one time, it seemed to have had an imperial desire to take over Paraguay and Uruguay, but not anymore. So I don't know. I think that the countries in South America are individualistic. Mm-hmm.
I just want to say thank
Yes.
you, Dr. Asante. And also thank you for the idea about the digital mediation, and
Yes.
using the digital kind of tools to try and bring forth more of this federated kind of vision.
Yes.
And I'm reminded of the quote that, Africa has no friends.
Yes.
Because even when, you can't read 20th century Africological or Africana, at least, literature without seeing a lot of Russia and a lot
Yes.
of socialism, communism, etc.
Yeah.
But the one question I have is, what about looking at today versus then? Because
Yeah.
isn't there a major shift that happens from the USSR to Russia, whereas today you see a newer realignment of
Yes.
people like Donald Trump,
Yes.
Bolsonaro,
Yeah.
Putin, and a symbol of white supremacy right now is in Russia,
Yes.
right? So it's not
Absolutely.
the same Russia as USSR, where there's this material
Absolutely.
thing that we could connect with as
That's a good
Africans
point.
who believe in collectivity.
That's a good point.
You have oligarchy there.
Yeah, it's a very good point, and I accept that point. I only would add an appendage to it, but I do accept the fact that the Soviet Union was, of course, aggressively against the colonial and imperial powers of the West, and that's why it supported African independence movement, but Russia itself is now, of course, seeking an imperial regime, and that imperial regime is extending its own influence, again, almost in response to the Western desire to incorporate more and more of the Slavic nations. And that is why you have this struggle with Ukraine. Ukraine wants to be with the West, but historically it was with Russia. So the Russians are, and then not only that, but there are, 20% at least of the Ukrainian population is Russian. That is, they're Russian people. They see themselves as Russian. And the part that Russia took over was essentially a part that was dominated by the Russian-speaking people. So it's a complicated issue. And I'm not coming down on the side of one or the other. I'm just simply saying historically what happened, you see. And I think that the African population probably still sees the Soviet Union when they say Russia. You see, that's why there's this respect, it seems, for Putin. And they see that was the line that has continued in terms of support for Africa. Okay, so I think that's all the. There are no questions from the YouTube? There's one question. What did it say?
Lucy asked, is any action being taken to resolve problems of illegal mining of cobalt?
Good. The question is, was there any, that's a good question from the YouTube. Is there any action being taken to stop the illegal mining of cobalt and copper and other things from Africa? And the answer is that yes, the African Union is engaged in that. They do have some organizations that are part of the AU that are looking at those issues. However, these are national issues. They're not, so the AU can only recommend. You can't say to Gambia that you shouldn't do this, or Namibia that you shouldn't do this, or Angola you shouldn't do this. It could say that these are the problems we see with what's going on, but you've got to resolve these issues. And I think that there are big issues like that. I mean, Namibia has been stripped of its uranium for the most part. And Angola, of course, is again now being again a lot of Chinese people going there, of course, doing that because people are making bilateral agreements for 100 years. You give us all your uranium and we'll build you a highway. You know what I'm saying? That's exactly right. Okay, well, thank you so much. I want to thank y'all. This has been wonderful. And our next session is September the 17th, and we will let you know. And I just want to recognize Dr. Amanor. Dr. Amanor is professor at Seton Hall, and we're so proud of him to get his job at Seton Hall. And he was the top student in our department, receiving the Sage Asante Award, and we just really proud of him. All right, Asante Sana. Thank y'all very much. Thank you, brother. Brother, you did a great job. Yeah, I'm so sorry, man. Yeah, no problem. So, hey, thank you.